And now, Chapter 6, The Weredogs. Hugin was croaking in the sky, circling above and around Brady and Max in a widening gyre, persistent and vociferous. Brady had never seen him so agitated before. Every day for the past 2 weeks, Brady and Max had followed the raven's lead, and each day the bird had led them to places that would be of great use in their struggle to survive, bringing them to several unlikely-looking places that had stores of food, water, tools, building supplies, even toilet paper. Brady renamed most of the streets and places to ones more suited to his knowledge and imagination. Hugin had become more than a bird. Brady determined that Hugin was an emissary from some unknown place, whose purpose was to guide him throughout the vast abandonment. How the raven knew where to go was a mystery, but with the bird's guidance, Brady's map grew ever more detailed and exacting. Hugin swooped low and landed on the top of a telephone pole, spreading his black wings like a cloak, and croaking, "Ragnarok, Ragnarok." It was the only word he ever seemed to say. Brady stopped Rocinante and dismounted, taking one of the 3 backpacks that were connected to the chassis with aluminum carabiner clips. Throwing it over his shoulder, he grabbed one of his paintball guns, checking to make sure his knives were in place, and then he took the gas mask in his other hand and walked into the yard of the house that Hugin obviously meant for him to explore, when he heard Max whining behind him, still sitting dutifully on the back of the 4-wheeler. Brady stopped and regarded him with amusement. Before the abandonment, Brady had enjoyed Max, like any boy of 14 years might appreciate his dog, with a passing pat on the head, a rare walk to the park, and late feedings after prolonged pleading. Since the abandonment, Brady's feelings for his dog had intensified and refocused. He was Brady's boon companion, his buddy, his best friend. He was something from the world before the abandonment, and he was proof of continuation. Max had been an old puppy in Brady's eyes, but now he was a man's dog, a helper in a hard and dangerous world. In the days before the abandonment, he would have never sat there on the back of the 4-wheeler. He would have jumped off and gone his own way, and Brady would have had to call after him, swear a little, and then run off to find him. It seemed that Max understood his new role in the world and accepted it. Brady whistled and jerked his head to the side and said, "Come on, boy," and Max complied. Like so many others, this house had nothing remarkable in it. There was no need for the gas mask because there were no bodies. Sometimes when Brady entered a house, even though there were no dead, he could feel someone's eyes watching him. Behind every door he could feel the presence of humans looking at him, only to find nothing but their absence. This was such a place. Only an empty shell that once housed people. He stood outside and withdrew a small red leather-bound journal from his leg pocket and wrote down a few cryptic notes. 45 Maple Street, nothing special, non-tomb. He doubted if he would even put it on his map. It was unremarkable. Glancing up at Hugin, who still called to him in his guttural tongue, he called, "What? What the heck do you want? What are you? What am I supposed to find?" Hugin croaked back, "Ragnarok." He ruffled his feathers, tucked his beak underneath his left wing, and picked it to himself for a moment, and then he did the equivalent of a bird shrug, took to the air, and flew to the backyard of the house. Brady followed. In a moment, it was obvious why Hugin had brought him here. The backyard was fenced in with heavy wire, and there, in the back corner, was a small wooden building. On the ground, here and there, were several chickens. They didn't look particularly healthy or move with any great store of energy, but the fact couldn't be denied. They were chickens. Brady couldn't help but instantly recall the savory taste of fried chicken, chicken fingers, chicken nuggets, and chicken with stuffing, boiled eggs, fried eggs, scrambled eggs, eggs with ketchup. Fresh food. After a visit to the feed store in Bangor and a rather nasty confrontation with a large rat that was obviously not afraid of him, he took care of the chickens like they were his pets. And he was suddenly a farmer, not just a hunter-gatherer. This made sense because it meant continuity. He double-checked the chicken wire and made sure there were no breaks where any animal larger than a mouse could gain access. The coop needed a heavy cleaning, and then he spent at least an hour a night reading a book he'd found in the house, a guide on how to raise poultry. More than anything he had done to improve his situation and standing in the world since the abandonment, this raised his spirits the most. However, killing the chickens was out of the question. The first time he found eggs in the roost, he realized the new food source could be never-ending. Brady named each hen, picking them up and inspecting them, making sure they were healthy, and spending no less than 3 hours scavenging the local houses for cookbooks on how to do anything with eggs besides fry them. In the end, his first omelet was a disaster, but the second one was better, and the third one was definitely palatable. He decided that it was the absence of a little heavy cream in the mixture. He did find some early onions, and there were some chunks of cheddar cheese he had in the Life-Seeker's cupboard. Within a week, he added some pre-cooked bacon from the Save-A-Lot and said aloud to Max, "Boy, I think this omelet is even better than the ones from Dysart's." For the first time since he had become lord of all that he surveyed, Brady Smith felt like he had more than just luck on his side. All the problems he had, all the questions, all the unknowns that stood lurking in the corners of his immediate future were nothing compared to the feeling he had at the moment. Eggs were more than food to him. Eggs were independence from the grocery stores and cupboards of dead strangers. If he could keep the chickens laying, he could ensure fresh food for the foreseeable future. When night fell, Brady found himself entering the Life-Seeker and making sure the door was shut tight because he heard them howling for the past few days. They had been in the distance, and though he had seen the wandering dogs sniffing around the neighborhoods, he didn't know that were-dogs existed until one day at dusk a week before he caught a faint glimpse of one. He'd been doing something crazy. Sometimes being the last boy on Earth was fairly depressing, but there were moments when he could forget, and the fact that he was a teenager emerged. One thing that Brady had always loved to do was play guitar. Badly. He wasn't very good at finishing full songs yet, but he had a few licks memorized from some of his favorite tunes. When his mother had been working, he would crank his little amp up loud, and on his $100 electric guitar, he would let fly a cadence and panoply of notes that drove the neighbors mad. Since electricity had failed, he'd played nothing, and hadn't even thought about music except to drive away the sound of the whisperers at night. On this day, Brady took the time to enjoy himself. Breaking into Mark's music near the bridge, Brady took care to choose his new guitar. There it was in its orange sunburst explosion, a Gibson Les Paul that would have cost thousands of dollars before the abandonment. But now it was his for the taking. He also managed a particularly heavy Marshall amp, chords, a tuner, several effects pedals, and a whole rack of picks. At the parking lot of the Brewer Shopping Center at the top of the hill, Brady started the Life-Seeker's generator and plugged in his equipment. The Marshall buzzed and then hummed quietly, ready for him to strike a note and break the world in half with its loud report. The sun was setting by the time he had his concert ready. And for a moment he was Angus Young, Jack White, The Edge, or Jimmy Page as he cranked the amp up to 10 and let his hands stroke the strings with a loud, crashing strum. The trees melted, the sky changed shade, and the wind began to blow. The force of his playing was intense, and he knew that at this moment he was the best guitar player in the world. A boyhood dream finally realized because, he shamefully admitted, he was probably the only guitar player left on the planet. It didn't matter, because music can suspend the passage of time as surely as it can mark it, and Brady played every lick he knew, switching between effects pedals, building up to the only song he could play all the way through with any confidence, Wild Thing by the Troggs. In the mix were licks of Pearl Jam, The White Stripes, Alice in Chains, Rage Against the Machine, Van Halen, and Green Day, and he played from his heart and what was left of his soul, his mind migrating outside of himself to that place where songs go after they've been heard. A bubble of sound effectively removed from the world and its vagaries encapsulated him. For a moment at least, the music and the volume smoothed away the harsh edges of the world. When he opened his eyes, the sun was nothing more than a memory and a red smear smudged across the edge of the horizon. Max was barking frenetically at something in the distance at the edge of the parking lot. Brady stopped playing and narrowed his eyes to get a better look at the falling dark. It was a creature, larger than any dog he had ever seen, gray and fierce. He could have sworn it was walking on its hind legs like a human. When it caught sight of him, its red eyes flashed before it turned and fell on all fours. Frozen in place by fear, Brady changed into observation mode and studied it like it seemed to be studying him. It reminded him of a werewolf from the old horror movies that they had showed on cable during October and Halloween time. Brady placed his finger on the high E string and fretted it up to the neck and began to play a long lick he invented on the spot. The creature seemed to cringe at the sound, and in a moment it turned away and bounded into the forest. Late in the night, past midnight, when the moon was high in the sky and the entire world was as black as velvet, he would hear them, long-lost brothers finally free from whatever human bonds had held them as mere animals. He wondered if they were humans who had turned into dogs, or dogs that had turned into humans. Either way, they were caught some way halfway in between the two worlds, and like a centaur or a minotaur from Greek mythology, these creatures seemed to have aspects of both man and animal, and therefore could be doubly dangerous. With no humans to bind them, they had been set free, and they were getting closer, taking their original shape from the depths of time, before the advent of civilization. He hoped that they would find enough wild deer to kill, but he knew that if that failed, these weredogs would hunt down, kill, and eat anything that moved, including him. They hunted at night, but with the loss of humans, they would quickly become less wary of the city environs, and soon they would be sniffing around the life-seeker and the chickens. If he waited and did nothing, they would be on his doorstep in a week. Paintball guns did not seem like they would be enough, so he had to find another way to repel them. He didn't relish the thought of a knife fight with what he dubbed a were-dog. He didn't want to get that close. When his mother had lost her job at the nursing home, and before she found employment at the hospital, they had gone through some lean times. Ketchup soup and ramen noodles were not unknown in Brady's diet, even after 2 years. Still, his mother had made a friend in the Bangor area, a man who ran a pawn shop. She would bring in a piece of gold or silver jewelry, and he would give her an amount of money for it, and if she paid him that money back in 30 days, plus interest, she could have the jewelry back. Rick would hold the jewelry for much longer than he was legally required. Brady knew that though Rick looked rough around the edges, that he was an honorable person, and more than that, a person with a good heart. However, he was no fool. The reason Brady was thinking of Rick right now was because he knew that Rick kept a taser in his office in his top desk drawer. Once, when his mom had sent him in to pay Rick the money, Rick showed Brady the taser when Brady asked him what he would do if anyone ever tried to rob him. "No problem," Rick said, opening his desk drawer. "I have a little something in here for them." He withdrew a taser and said, "There's enough electricity in this little box to stop a man in his tracks. He'll fall down on the floor in so much pain he won't be able to move for a hell of a long time, and that would give me plenty of time to call the cops. And all you have to do is point this at the perp and press the button. The rest happens on its own." Brady knew that he might need such a weapon to fight off the weredogs. They were intelligent and might be able to work together to take him down. He still didn't want to use a gun, as easy as that would have been. The death of his father left him forever wary of firearms, whose actions were undoable, and from whose discharge came certain death. His problem was really very simple. Brady didn't want to kill anything, not even the weredogs. He just wanted to be left alone. The taser wouldn't kill, but it would render the creature incapable of attack, and if they were smart enough to learn, they wouldn't come back for another taste of it. It was just after 3 o'clock when Brady finally found his way into Rick's pawn shop. Going there was a last-minute decision. He left Max at the Life-Seeker that was parked in the old Brewer Shopping Center parking lot. Max had become used to staying close to the Life-Seeker when Brady needed to take short trips, and now that's exactly what he did. Like most of the shops he had entered since the abandonment, the pawn shop was strangely hushed and lonesome. The items on the shelves and in the storage room and safe would rest there forever, never to be picked up by their previous owners. There were tools, mostly electrically powered, a few chainsaws, rifles and guitars, a drum set, a slew of video games and DVDs. He paused and took a few of each. He wasn't stealing. They all belonged to him now. The taser was in Rick's drawer, as well as 2 others in the back room. He had to check them to make sure that they were charged. He would have to read the manual that Rick had so fortuitously left next to the taser, hoping that he could charge them later using the small generator on the back of the Life-Seeker. If not, he had already mapped several generators around the area with full tanks of diesel. From what he could tell, only one taser was fully charged. The sun was getting low in the sky, and Brady sat in Rich's chair watching the sky through the big windows. He used to really enjoy coming to this place. There were so many things here he wanted before the abandonment that now seemed pointless and wasted. Anything that ran on electricity, including the tasers, had a limited lifespan. He needed things that would last and be of use without electricity. As he was leaving the shop through the front door, he heard Hugin's raucous cry, "Ragnarok, Ragnarok." Hugin was circling above Rocinante, continuing his calling back toward the river and brewer. "What is it?" he asked. Rocinante's wheels spun madly as he kicked the four-wheeler into gear, rolling past the casino and down the riverfront to the bridge. Hugin was leading him back to the Life-Seeker. He took the center bridge over the great river at full throttle. The sun was setting when he saw them. At least 6 weredogs were surrounding the Life-Seeker, and in the center of the pack was Max. He was so much smaller than they were, and he was outnumbered, but he didn't seem to notice or particularly care. They had cornered him underneath the vehicle, and they were on their knees, reaching underneath, growling and spitting, barking their anger and murderous intent. Max might only just be out of their reach, but when they reached beneath to grab at him, he bit them and tore their flesh, which served to aggravate their already intense frustration. They heard Rocinante and turned their attention to Brady. Brady drove a circle around the Life-Seeker, trying to determine his best course of action. They were much bigger than he imagined when he had heard them breaking the night silence with their guttural monosyllabic calls. Gray, covered with coarse steel-wool hair, seeming to walk on all fours and then on two, they formed a circle and faced him as he drove around them in a distance. They glared at him with crimson eyes that followed his path. He didn't know if they were cunning or acting upon instinct. Max continued to growl from underneath the Life-Seeker, and he knew that if Max sensed that he was in danger, he would leave his relative safe haven and come to his aid, even if he was outnumbered and outsized. Brady checked to see if his sword was unlatched from the scabbard on his back, and then he pulled the paintball rifles out of the twin holsters he had fastened on either side of Rocinante's front axle. He stopped for a moment and then took careful aim. His first shots hit the largest of the group, a particularly mangy, drooling, fanged beast of questionable breed. It flinched and then cried out in pain, but then growled more deeply. Its fur was no longer a dull and lifeless gray, but purple in the spots that had been hit. The next shot hit the same creature in the snout near the eye, and the creature howled to its companions as it moved erratically, blinded momentarily. It was disoriented enough to cause the other weredogs to stir into confusion. They milled about their purple-snouted companion, barking and growling. "Now, boys," called Brady, "I don't want any trouble. You all go on your merry way, and I'll forget all about this little visit. If you stay, I'll shoot all of you in the face. And I won't kill you, but you'll hurt like hell. Leave Max and me alone. We're not bothering anyone. We got nothing here for you that you want. Now go." Obviously, they weren't as intelligent as he imagined. Human speech seemed to have escaped them. He placed 6 quick shots from each weapon, hitting each of the weredogs. They were wild with anger, but they had new respect for the boy on the four-wheeler. They didn't come any closer except for the big one. He was obviously the alpha male and needed to maintain his superiority in front of the others. Lowering his huge body to the ground in a coiled crouch, he was ready to fly through the distance and engage in combat. Brady holstered both of the rifles and withdrew a baseball from one of the fender bags, and like a pitcher readying to throw the last ball at a shutout game, he stood on Rocinante and aimed, curling his body as he thrust the ball at the leader. "Strike one!" he yelled. The crowd cheers. Brady made hissing and hurrah sounds, and then took a paintball pistol from his hip holster. It was a smaller weapon with limited range, but he needed one hand to maneuver Rocinante as he approached the Life-Seeker. Meanwhile, the last light of the setting sun was making this confrontation much more interesting than it would have been in the clear light of day. The movement of the four-wheeler confused the pack of weredogs. Brady wondered what they had been before the change, before the abandonment had forced them to transform into these fell creatures. Had he known any of them? He didn't know the particulars of their origin or genesis, but he knew they weren't in the world before the abandonment. The world had changed, and in some ways it had become a far more dangerous place. He had not yet given up trying to persuade them to leave. Besides, he had the taser, even if he only had one charge in it. "What do you want here?" he called to them. Most of them barked and snarled, their circling motion aggravated by his question, and then the largest weredog said in a low and guttural grinding growl that sounded only vaguely like "kill." He repeated himself. He spat it out with a vengeance. It was the only word in his vocabulary. He reared up on his 2 hind legs and used his forepaws to motion Brady to come closer. "Not today," shouted Brady, and he gunned Rocinante, lifting the two front wheels off the ground. He fired a non-stop volley of paintballs at ever closer range as he moved quickly forward, veering at the last moment as the creature fell back, whimpering and confused, blinded with color. "Get away! All of you, go!" Brady unclipped the sports horn from the hook on Rocinante's steering column and pressed a button. The sound was deafening. The weredogs' ears fell back flat on their heads, and they cringed, falling back and away from the life-seeker. Brady stopped the four-wheeler and dismounted. Strangely, he was unafraid of them, even though he knew that he should be. He thought that it would be otherwise, but the world had changed. He had changed. Walking toward them, he was their superior, though he was alone and young. And more than that, he also had the taser in his right hand, ready to shoot the first weredog that got in his way. They moved one step back for each step he took toward them, their eyes all on their leader, who was dazed and confused on the ground, unable to see. Brady pressed the button on the horn again, and they began to flee into the darkness, all except the big one. As he got closer to it, he could hear it grumbling in a low growl, "Grindle, Grindle," over and over again in frustration, and Brady thought, fear. "Leave me alone. Never come back, or you'll feel the bite of my weapon. I don't want to be so nice next time. Leave us alone," Brady said emphatically. "Ah!" screamed the chief weredog. He lunged at Brady and hit him full on the body, pushing him down to the ground. Brady's grasp of the taser was lost, and it clattered away on the pavement, rolling out of his grasp. He was pinned beneath the creature, whose forepaws held each arm down to the pavement. He slavered over Brady as he sneered, revealing yellowed, calcified teeth, not like a dog's, but like a man's. Drops of spittle drooled down upon Brady's face as he fought to move the heavy creature from his own body. "Kill! Grindle!" His tongue shot out from his mouth and ran along its teeth longingly. Brady's left leg was positioned perfectly, and he lifted it with all of his strength, kicking squarely between the weredog's legs. Man or dog, this was going to hurt. It howled in agony and fell over, unable to move or think. The other weredogs were approaching again. Max shot out from under the life-seeker and attacked the one closest to Brady, locking his jaws on the creature's lower leg. It fought back. "Max, no!" Brady screamed, but it was too late. The weredog kicked at Max, and then, at an impossible twisting of its own body, bent over backwards and bit Max on the neck. Max's body fell limp to the pavement. He moved no more. Brady scrambled to find the taser, but it was too far away. He had successfully defeated the biggest weredog, who was now limping from the parking lot and back into the fresh dark of the night that, like a blanket, had just covered the planet. He ran at the weredog that had bitten Max, screaming at the top of his lungs, and withdrew his sword from its scabbard on his back. It sang as it escaped its prison and felt the air. Holding it raised in his left hand, he took the paintball gun in his right hand and emptied it at the creature, painting it with pain. It fled into the darkness with its master and brothers. Brady stood there in the parking lot in near darkness and let loose a primal scream. It was a scream of early man as he hunted on the plains. It was the tribal shout of retribution, the soldier's bloody cry as he attacked his doomed foe. It was the release of tension and anger. It was defiance. When he checked Max, he feared the worst. The dog was still breathing, but he was losing blood. After a cursory check for broken bones, something he had never done before and was certainly unaware of, Brady picked him up gently and brought him to the life-seeker. He placed Max's shuddering body gently, tenderly on the floor. After applying a bandage, the thought occurred to him that Max might need stitches. Worse, he wondered if Max might die. The reading on first aid that he had done told him to keep Max warm, stop the bleeding, and administer antibiotics. Brady had anticipated a need for an emergency medical kit for himself, but he had never considered Max. It was imperative that Max survive. He had to. Brady couldn't bear the idea of losing his best, his only friend. If Max died, then the world would truly be dead, and Brady would be lost. He would be alone. The Brewer Veterinary Clinic was unlocked when Brady entered, his headlight illuminating the waiting and examining rooms on the marble floor. He'd been a visitor here with Max many times, and had always liked Dr. Prayer. No matter what was wrong with Max, the fair-haired gentleman always reassured Brady that everything would be as it should be, not that everything would be all right. Brady liked that Dr. Prayer didn't talk down to him or make blanket statements that weren't true just to comfort him. And now he wondered if things were as they should be, and what that even meant. The drugs were kept just outside the examining rooms. Brady had noticed them many times. Now he was looking for something. Penicillin, amoxicillin, something that ended with cillin. These were antibiotics, and he knew Max needed some. He also looked for the supplies he would need to stitch Max's wounds. He relied so heavily on Max for companionship that he couldn't imagine a world without him. Strange, he thought, that I can live in a world I never could have imagined without any people, but without this old dog, I think I'll go crazy. He has to live. Determining that it was better to be safe than sorry, Brady found suturing equipment and antiseptic. He brought Max into the operating theater and strapped him down, and then he cleaned the wound soundly and carefully stitched it closed. He remembered that once, when Max had been very dehydrated, the doctor had given him a shot of water just under the skin to hydrate him quickly. He knew Max needed fluids, but he didn't dare do any more than he had already done, and instead he determined to nurse Max back to health if that meant one spoonful of water at a time. The next 3 days were torture for Brady. Never leaving the Brewer Veterinary Clinic, he took care of Max and read all day from the manuals, lists of procedures, and reference books. He learned a great deal in that time, enough to know that he had done almost everything that he could have done for his friend. Max lingered quietly in a nearly motionless state, shuddering from time to time, making small whining noises and then falling into deep, deep slumber. Brady moved him into one of the cages in the back and closed it. He needed to resupply some of his own food and water. He wouldn't need to be out for very long. End of chapter.